So SharePoint is Microsoft's cloud service that helps you to share and manage your content and information. A SharePoint environment is bespoke to each company and should really be set up and tailored around how you work as a business, probably taking into consideration your existing ways of working and processes, and then looking for ways that we can enhance or streamline these. This then tends to help empower teamwork, allow employees to quickly find information, and then seamlessly collaborate throughout the organization. SharePoint is a very different way of working compared to an on-premise infrastructure, so you would need to embrace the new modern way of working. SharePoint should not be used to dump your existing company data into it and then continue working as if you were accessing it from the server. SharePoint is a platform to use for your long-standing company data. Things such as policies, procedures, staff handbooks, directories, and departmental data, to name a few. Any data that you have that needs to be secured, governed, audited, or require specific controls or maybe retentions applied around it, then SharePoint is the service to use. The great thing about SharePoint Online is that you're not restricted to being on your internal network to access your files. You can securely access them from anywhere on all devices. So going back to the Office landing page that I showed you earlier, you can also access SharePoint from the app launcher at the top left here. What this does, however, is it takes you into a specific view per user. So it's quite chaotic and it can be quite difficult to drive with users not knowing really where to navigate because it's based on the Microsoft graph showing you what it thinks it wants you to see. So what we like to do is to create sort of tailored landing pages. This would be branded and themed and look however you want. So I'll just flick through a few examples. So quite simple, basic landing pages. And we've got sort of more comprehensive intranet-y type landing pages. Similar ones. Again, it's all, regarding your brand and how you want it to look and what you want people to see when first accessing it. That's how it's built and tailored. So the reason we create landing pages is because, again, going back to the point that I said, that it's a very different way of working. When people are accessing their data currently, they're probably very used to going to like a Z drive or an S drive and accessing your data through that way. That would essentially be redundant when using SharePoint. So we need to create a single point of entry to access your company data. And then because everyone would be accessing it through the same landing page, it's really great to double that up as sort of an information point or an intranet. So although you technically could just have some buttons or some navigation that would take you into your departmental workspaces that would essentially replicate your top level folders on a server. Like I said, you can double that up and sort of use it as a communication tool. So you can add upcoming events or latest news announcements that maybe historically you're sending out as all staff emails. Within SharePoint, when we click behind the workspace, these are called SharePoint sites. And this essentially would replace a top level folder on a server. This is more than just files and folders now. So what you actually get is a bespoke workspace. So within that workspace, you've got a landing page that can be configured however you want. So think of it almost as a SharePoint site is a physical room. And within that room, you have a whiteboard, which can be, you can add whatever information that you need on that whiteboard. You can have document libraries, which are essentially filing cabinets, and a lot of other resources that you can use, and I'll touch on shortly. Similarly to OneDrive, the Office suite is inbuilt into here. So again, this doesn't mean that you're restricted to using certain PCs to access and create information. You can come in and start to create files directly from here. The difference between this and OneDrive is that it's all permission driven. So once you create a file within, say, the admin workspace, everyone that then has access to the admin workspace would see these files straight away. And then again, you've got that collaborative element should you need to. You've also got the sync option within SharePoint, very similar to OneDrive. This shouldn't be really used. There are ways that you should probably use that for best practice, but with SharePoint, everything should start from online, and you should really get into the habit of using your data from here in the first instance. There's other things that you can use within SharePoint. So one of them is SharePoint lists. These are very similar to sort of tables or databases or spreadsheets, and they can be used to streamline lots of different processes. So one, for example, maybe expenses trackers. Say, for example, if you're using you're logging expenses at the minute, maybe on a spreadsheet, and it's very difficult for users to add information to that spreadsheet without them being able to see everyone else's expenses, or to achieve the security they're having to tell someone else their expenses, email it to them maybe, and then someone else is adding it to the spreadsheet. So with SharePoint you can use lists. The good thing about lists is what you get in the first instance is a form. So you get a form to help the data entry become a lot easier, and that can be a series of sort of single lines of text, date columns, currencies, drop down columns, just to make that data entry slightly easier. Stuff like images. So in this scenario, in an expenses tracker, if you need to upload a receipt, you can have an image column, and all of this can be done on mobile phones, tablets, just to make that significantly easier. What this can also be configured in a way that so that users only see their own entries, whereas maybe management or HR or whoever's managing the expenses, they get a view of everyone's expenses. Each item has version control, so you can come in and look at the version history on each item, and you can see what's been changed and when. This is the same for files also. So within SharePoint, each file has version control. So you can always go and look at the version history of that particular file and see what's been done by when. By default, that captures 500 versions. At that point, it will then start to overwrite the oldest versions and then start to create new ones. SharePoint, you can also incorporate sharing as well. So if there's ever an example where maybe you're struggling to send files to clients or customers or vice versa because they're too big, so you ended up using solutions like Mail Big File or getting a free version of Dropbox, SharePoint can be configured so you can use sharing as well. And when I say configured, this can be turned on at sort of different levels. So for example, you might have like a finance site that needs to be very controlled. There's never a scenario where data needs to be shared externally, so we can turn it off for finance. But then you may have a training hub, and that works in a case where external users need to come in and view some of that training content. So without you having to download it, creating numerous versions of files and sending it back to them, you can utilize sharing, and it works in the exact same way as OneDrive. One of the new features within SharePoint is a document sort of classification system. So I'll quickly show you that. And this basically automatically extracts information from files. So in this scenario, we've got a customer database. So showing the example earlier I showed you of a list. This is a list in the same way, but what it's doing is just creating a customer database. So every time we have a new customer, we add it to the customer database. You can then set up automation in the background. So when it does that, it would maybe create a customer contract automatically based on the name of the customer that we add to the database. Lastly, we've got SharePoint syntax, which is one of the new features. So what this can do is we can train it to identify certain documents. So in this example, quotes. Within that quotes, we need to extract the customer name from the quote and add it to a column here. What columns allow us to do is filter files based on certain properties. So for example, if I want to come in and look at all of the quotes for this customer, instead of hiding them away in a folder, I can come in and just filter it based on the customer that I'm looking for. What that will then do is get rid of everything else, and then I can come in and view all of that. So in terms of the sort of classification, this can be doubled up with modern templates either. So what we've got here on this new menu, because we only want quotes to be saved in this particular library, the menu can be tailored so it can't create any other type of document. So when you were to come in and create a new quote, this is what a modern template would look like. So we no longer have to go in and manually enter our customer information here. We've configured the template to actually look at our customer database. So what we can do then is go in and select our customer that we're looking for and that we want to add to this particular quote, add it, and then it will pre-populate that file wherever we determine that information needs to be added. Once it's added, we can create the document, name it, and then it will save in our quotes library. Once that's saved, once that's saved down here somewhere, the system will realize that it's a customer quote file, and after a few minutes, it will pull the information from that file that I've added to it. So I'll come back to this in a sec just to show you how it does it, because it sometimes takes a minute or so. So it's called new quote 8. Okay. Going back to columns quickly. Columns are really good also for controlling and managing policies. So in a scenario, I tend to see quite often people, they save their policies in folders, and then maybe they have a calendar or a spreadsheet somewhere where they're tracking when those policies are up for review. And then on the back of that, if someone needs to update a policy, but it needs to be approved before it's visible to anyone else, then maybe you're sending it via email and just creating lots and lots of versions of those policies. So with SharePoint, you can really, really streamline that process. So what we can see here is a list of our company policies. Again, with the columns, we don't have to hide these within folders anymore. On a server, the only way you've got to add some information about a file is to save it in a folder, name the folder what what information is within that, and that's the only way you can do it. But again, with SharePoint, you can utilize these columns. So what I can do here, if I'm coming in and I'm looking for HR policies, again, I can come in, filter it, and then apply that, and then it will get rid of what I'm looking for. What you can also do with columns is you can add multiple bits of metadata to it. So for example, you might have a policy that actually is a health and safety policy and a HR policy. If that was a case on a server environment, you'd either have to duplicate the policy and save one version in each folder, or you would have to only have it in one folder. Whereas with SharePoint, you can tag it with multiple policies. So if I'm coming in and looking for different types, whichever filter I use, it will still show me the policy. Going back to the review process, you can add a review date also. So this binds a review date to the actual file. So you're not having to look somewhere else to find out when they're reviewed. It binds it here. So on that, you can come in and filter it to when they're newer to older and that kind of stuff. Or you can go one step further and actually create custom views. So what I've created here is on this drop down, this is basically the views that you can create, either personal views or shared views. So what we've done here is actually created a review calendar. So if I flick it into a review calendar, it's going to take these files and put it into a calendar. So I can come in and easily see when policies are up for renewal on a calendar format. Lastly, you can inbuilt an approval workflow. So based on what I said earlier about sometimes people are emailing files around for someone to update it and then send it back and creating multiple versions of files. That can be done with permissions on SharePoint. So say, for example, if I come in and I need to update this particular policy, which is in a different language, once I make that change, it will update the file and save it. But what happens now is it will go into a pending state. So what this means is when people come and access the policy, they will only be able to see it in the version before I've made any changes. So now users with actually the approval permission can come in, they will be able to see the changes that I've made, and providing they're happy with it, they can then approve the document. Once it's approved, the changes will be published, and then everyone will be able to see those new changes, and we can quite easily see which ones are approved and which ones aren't. Just quickly going back to my example here. Oh, it hasn't actually done it yet. Again, because this is a sort of artificial intelligence technology, it can take a few minutes or so, but essentially what happens is similarly to what I've shown you here, it will pull that information from that file and add it as a customer name without me having to manually add any properties myself.